Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I am Lauren Bucksbaum. I'm the regional manager for David Sutherland Showrooms. David Sutherland Showrooms are exclusive to the trade and represent the finest in home furnishings, fabrics, and accessories, along with the company's signature perennials and Sutherland brands. We are very excited and honored to host this webinar. And with that being said, I would like to introduce Jackie Terrebonne, who is the editor-in-chief of Galerie Magazine, who will be moderating today's panel. Galerie delivers the finest in art, interiors, and architecture and destinations. Welcome, Jackie, and I hope everyone enjoys.
Thank you so much. I am so excited about today's panel because we're really talking about one of my favorite topics, which is design books. I stack them up in bed at night. I read them, I flip through them, I surround my whole apartment is really filled with them, and they offer such beautiful inspiration, fantastic stories. And for designers, you know, they're absolute babies. Putting together these books takes a lot of time, effort, love, sweat, tears, all of it. So the panel we put together today with Corey Damen Jenkins, Christopher Spitzmiller, Kate Hume, they all have fantastic new books out right now from Rizzoli, and they're going to take us through the process of, you know, how it all happens, really look behind the curtain and see what it takes to get a book sold to a publisher, and then what it takes next to get it out on bookshelves and on Amazon top lists. So welcome our wonderful panel. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Of course, of course. And I think we just need to jump right in. And I want to know from each of you sort of the story of how your book came together and how you brought that to a publisher. So maybe Kate, if you'd like to start and tell us a little bit about what your journey was like to get a book sold.
We were planning to do a book but it was kind of far in the future, I felt. And then I had a call with the girl that became my writer just to ask some advice. And she said, oh, you know, let me think about it. Well, maybe I should write this. So it started out like a little team effort with Linda. And she pitched it to Rizzoli and they said yes. So it was actually a kind of a strange but very fast decision, I think, in the end. And then we realized that, you know, we had to get cracking and really organize it.
So what was the focus that you went in with to Rizzoli? What do you think attracted them to your designs, other than them being totally fabulous? But you know, they want that hook. So what do you think that was?
Well, I think they wanted a European point of view. I think they wanted a female point of view, those two things. And then we pitched a kind of story of my life type angle, if you like. So rather than just, you know, many different spaces, it was really, how do I think, and what have I done in my life to allow me to think that way? I don't think they knew they were getting that really, but that's in the end how it sort of worked out, because it's an evolution. You know, you start with something and then it evolves, and I think it's the teamwork, you know, because it's my husband and I work together, so we were really this sort of solid team. He took all the photographs, he art directed it. So it was a family affair, and they were quite interested in that. And I think they were a little also taken aback by, you know, doing that because it was strong, let's say. But it was a really great experience. And of course, you know, much more time consuming than you ever imagine it will be, but it was wonderful.
Right. And Christopher, what about for you? I mean, how did this book come about? It's absolutely gorgeous, but you know, maybe someone would have thought you would do a book on lamps. So how did this book come together for you and get in front of the folks at Rizzoli?
Yeah, two publishers wanted me to do a book on lamps, you know, so that my book has been like more than 15 years in the making. I've owned my house for that long, and so I slowly renovated it, and I got that together, and I built gardens, and I built a pool, and got it all together because, you know, my big idols are Bunny Williams and Martha, and, you know, they both wrote their first book, Bunny's book, which has been out for, I believe, 17 years and is in the top 100 of its category still. And Martha's book, Entertaining, is still in the top 100. And I wanted to do a book on my version of what they had covered, sort of my own take on it. And so it took a long time to sort of get that across to a publisher. I worked with Jill Cohen, who works on a lot of design books, and she was very helpful to keep me focused and to do the first initial shots that we did of the farm and what was going on. And she got me hooked up with some really great photographers who took great work, the Ingalls, and then Clint Smith, who helped me with the writing on it. So we have this really great design team, and Doug Tertian, who does a lot of books at Rizzoli, did the layout of it. So we put together beginning things, and thankfully, one of the editors at Rizzoli, Kathleen, fell in love with it and was like, I want to do this book, and said to her boss, Charles, if you don't do this book, I'm going to cry. And, it took us 3 years of like figuring out when the peonies were going to be in bloom and when this was going to be in bloom, and fly these photographers who conveniently lived in LA all the way into New York. And we shot and got most of it done in like a one-day thing. And, I think that was the thing. It's sort of the team that got it all together. It got it all. It's not just, it's my job to like get the shoot list together, and that's the thing that Jill educated me on, of like that what you need to do is that the preparation of getting ready for the shoot and the things you want to cover in that is more important, and it actually takes longer time than the shoot itself. So that we'd have our tools ready, or we'd have our bulbs ready, or the table would always be set, because I always set the table far out, even just for a dinner that I do. But it's getting your ducks in a row and lined up so you get the most impact out of your shoot time.
And going back to that initial pitch meeting, did you go to them with a sample chapter of what this would be like?
Yeah, we went to them with a sample chapter, and my initial thing was that they wanted tablescapes to be a big part of it. And so there's a table or two for every season in there. And I wanted there to be a menu along with it that would have recipes. And they were like, whoa, that's too much. So what we will do is we'll put 2 recipes in for every season if you grow the thing at the farm. And so like we have a recipe for like roast shallots in there. There's a recipe for a roast chicken in there. So there are like my standard sort of best ones in there. So I had hoped there'd be more, but it was nice to sort of, once we established the parameters of which we were going to work in, Rizzoli sort of just let me go and do it, which was very nice.
And this idea that it was the year.
I mean, the other thing that I want to point out is it's not for the people who are faint of heart or the people who are faint of budget. I mean, it was expensive to do, but I've already seen it pay off. I have to say that, like we had a few vendors that had sort of fallen off the wagon that like saw that there's a book, and they're like, we want to do a book signing, and like they reordered their lamps and stuff. So like, it does pay off in a lot of different ways, and I'm happy with the results. And we're only 3 weeks into it, and I've seen a good uptake in business so far from it. So it's worthwhile.
Fantastic. And Corey, for you, how did the concept come together? What did that pitch process look like for Design Remix?
Well, Design Remix came out yesterday, and so I am still like literally reeling from all of the emotion of what's happened the last 24 hours. But my story mirrors my fellow colleagues here and panelists. My publicist had a great connection at Rizzoli, and that, as Christopher mentioned, I also had the honor and privilege of working with Kathleen, who was an amazing gift to manage the process, because there's so much diplomacy that goes into crafting a book with designers and graphic designers and writers and co-writers and all of that. But my publicist approached her, and they chatted about the concept of me doing a book. And then I was informed that there was some interest, and I was surprised because I'm from the Midwest. At the time I was living in Michigan. And even though I live here in New York City now, at the time we started the project like 3 years ago, I was really more firmly based in Michigan with a satellite office in New York. And most of the authors that I see that have coffee table books are mostly from the coast and from maybe the South. There's never been a coffee table book on that level from the Midwest. So that was kind of our angle, was what does Metro Detroit design look like? What does decorating and design look like in the big 3, the home of the big 3 as far as the automotive world? What do those homes, those executives' homes look like? So we really wanted to come to it from the angle of making the book accessible. Certainly the design is very high end, and the mansions are what they are. but I did want the project to be accessible. So like what Christopher mentioned about having like the recipes, for me, the recipes were about how to do certain elements of interior decoration, and peppering that throughout every single chapter. Every chapter has takeaways. So that appealed to the editors. You know, how do you choose the right window treatment? How do you pick the right paint color? When do you pick your paint color? How do you do a gallery wall and hang that on the wall? How do you use fashion and fabrics to inspire your selection of furnishings and, you know, for the room? Things that people ask me all the time, but a lot of times coffee table books either gloss over or don't address at all. We really didn't want the book to be just a book of pretty rooms, but really practical advice that was accessible for both the design enthusiast and for the up and coming interior designer who was in school or maybe could not afford to go to school and wanted to get more, you know, background on how to do this lovely thing that we call design. So Kathleen loved that concept. She was like, let's do it. And I think once we embarked on it, I was like, oh my God, what have I signed up for? Because it's an incredible amount of work. And I do a lot of drawings. I have 15 sketches and illustrations I drew by hand throughout the book to illustrate each, like the window treatments and the paint cans and the paint brushes and, you know, the bookshelves and how to do it. So my wrist is still, you know, I'm still soaking in Epsom salt every night. But, you know.
Well, now you're going to have to, again, you're going to have to do so many book plates and signings.
I'm getting a stamp. Just kidding.
Can't do that. Oh my gosh. Well, I love that each of you has, you know, it really has a unique focus, a unique point of view that you brought to them. And I think that's one of the big things that sells the book. Like, what story are you trying to tell? Not just like, hey, look, I'm a great designer. I have a lot of projects to tell, but you need to have sort of that angle, that focus, what sets you apart. It sounds like Kate, for you, is very much about Europe and having that European sensibility and the what point of view of a woman. I mean, Christopher, I love that yours is this, you know, labor of love, this house that you've spent so much time crafting and creating, and that you're so hands-on there, you know, with every element of the garden and the chicks and ducks and swan. I mean, the whole menagerie that you have going out there.
Isn't
and Corey,
it
for you, I mean,
interesting that we have all said the same thing, that we've all wanted to have a story, though, you know, there has to be, it's not just an interior design book anymore. You have to have something else to offer, you know. I think that's quite interesting that everyone here has said the same thing. And I think
and I feel like, you know, that story, you have it in the beginning, but then it really comes down to the team that you assemble. So Kate, how did you put together your team? You talked a little bit before, you had a writer, you had your husband. What did that team look like? And how did you work together to really craft this story?
It was just really me and my husband, actually. I mean, Linda was there as I mean, she's a Brit living in the States, and I was a Brit living in the States. So, I mean, we have that in common, I guess, because I was living in America some years ago. But we came from the same kind of viewpoint as you know, as she as a writer, and she was writing in my voice. So she had to interview me extensively for days. She came here to France to do that. And then, of course, it was my husband and I. So we're literally 24/7 together. We've always worked together. So, you know, it's volatile sometimes, you know, let's be honest. But we had a fairly clear idea of where we wanted to go. And I just let him take that strain, at least, you know, which was great. And so there really, in a sense, wasn't a team. It was just the normal team, if you like. We weren't really working with anyone else. We could call to Rizzoli and say, you know, because we had no technical background in this at all. So we'd ask them technical questions, but just in terms of how it went, it was very intimate, actually. And the book is very intimate. You know, it's really the stories of our life and our, you know, our family and our kids and, you know, how I grew up with my mum and dad. I mean, it's all in there. So it's an intimate story.
Yeah. And then did you have all of your photography done? And then put the layouts together and then give it to the writer? Was that sort of how your process?
No, we laid it out, and then we actually laid out the text almost as if it was a photograph. So there's blocks of text that marry the photos. I think that's probably a very European way of approaching it. So Linda would be like, what do you mean I have to cut 10 words? I was like, you have to cut 10 words. It doesnn't fit. But it was the opposite. It was a writer's nightmare. I mean, honestly, really, she would be like, oh God. But it worked, because we really wanted this uniform pattern, if you like, to run through it. And that's what it is in a sense.
And
It's
that's
a
great.
readable pattern. Yeah.
And Christopher, you mentioned you worked with Jill Cohen. How did the process work with her? How did she, guide you along the way? It's very different than, your everyday world.
So Jill first comes to your office and takes a bucket of cold water and throws it all over you. It's like, it's going to be hard. It's going to be this. It's going to be expensive. It's going to be this. It's kind of like in art school. I went to school at Rhode Island School of Design for ceramics, and they taught you there, if you could do anything else, you probably should do it. It was a little bit like that of like, you're really going to get in deep. Are you sure you really want to do it? And then she'll meet with you the second time and she'll be a little bit more encouraging and fostering, but it's still, there is that sort of like toughness to her there. I mean, she's very tough, and she, I wanted to be on the cover of my book. This was one of my things with her. And she's like, well, they didn't put Mary McDonald on the cover of her book, and they didn't put Carolyn Rome on the cover. And I'd be like doing my homework, and I'm like, no, Carolyn got on the cover of her last one. Look. There was this back and forth that went on, but I learned a huge amount, as I was talking about before, about shoot lists, about what you need to prepare for. Like that's the part that she was good at and got me sort of going. And she did most of the brokering of the actual deal stuff. She met with the other publishers. I met with one on my own early on, and I liked the publisher, but the math of the whole project wasn't working for me. And so that's what made me say, okay, we got to get Jill involved, because she knows about this. And it's just, she's done so many books. Like Bonnie's worked with her, Carolyn's worked with her, all my friends have worked with her. So it was like, okay. And then with her, she gets you going and gets you trained, and then you go off on your own and do it, and you check in with her every so often. But at the beginning, like Jill would come to all the shoots that we had, and then she sort of realized that we got what needed to be done, and the confidence sort of moved up, and then it moved into maybe Doug Tertian would be there when we did the shoots. But the photographers I worked with were really, really good. It's a husband and wife team, and Andrew and Gemma Ingalls, and Gemma's particularly good at those up close pictures that I have a lot of in my book, like the specimen lilies and peonies and dahlias, and she's good at arranging stuff. She's sort of like an on-team stylist. It's right there, because I have really good taste and stuff, but I have to say that I'm not always the best at styling it. So she was really good at that part of it.
It can be so different through the lens, right?
Completely different through the lens. Although I have to say that I've learned through that and through other stuff that if I'm trying something in a room, like let's say I'm putting a chair in it, or I want to see and I can't quite get an idea of whether or not I really like it, just take a picture with your iPhone and look at it that way. Like that totally like gives you like composition and like, does it work? Is the scale right? Like it's funny how a third angle gets you in there.
That's interesting. I like that. So she helped with putting together a writer for you, and then you had your team.
Yeah, she connected me with Clint Smith, who of course is a longtime friend of mine, and he's been to my house lots of time for Christmas parties and stuff. But I don't think I would have asked Clint on my own. I mean, this is the thing that Jill did for me, is she opened up doors that I wouldn't have necessarily opened up on my own, that I probably was capable of. But for some reason, she would just say, oh, this is the person who should write this. And it made so much sense. And we both really enjoyed the process through it. So
that's great. And Corey, you mentioned your publicist being key and getting the book sold. Did she help you through the process, or were you like, how did you figure out what needed to happen when, and who was going to be on your team?
I had an amazing team. So I'm represented by Nib and Breen. So Chezzy and Ellen and Coco have been so incredibly supportive throughout this entire, preparing for the launch and getting the word out. But also from a creative standpoint, bouncing ideas off of them, what do you think about this for, this idea and for this layout and things of that nature. So they were very supportive. But in the actual, so they were basically, if you look at like a hurricane, I always speak in analogies, I apologize. They were on the outside of the storm. They were basically the transition point between what's happening inside the vortex, the actual eye of the storm, the creation, and the outside world, and getting out the vision of the book and the narrative of the book out to the world. In the actual eye of the storm, you had Caitlin Leffel, who was my co-writer. You had Kathleen as our editor. And we had Susie Oberhelman, who was working as our graphic designer. And so all of these incredible women, and in particular, these 3 women with me in the actual eye of the storm, they were the ones that were helping me really navigate these uncharted waters for me as far as putting together this book. And I think that because everyone was so open-minded about what we wanted this book to be, and they were so accommodating to my vision, I learned a lot. I had a lot of questions, and they were just really good about, well, that's really not what we do. And this is the reason why you don't want to do that. And I'm like, hey, so you have to be humble. You have to really be willing to take criticism. The room you may love may not end up being in the book. Even when we pitched the initial concept to Kathleen, there was certain imagery that we pitched in the initial presentation that did not make the final cut, because of whatever reason, with Susie, maybe graphically it didn't quite fit, or the narrative perhaps just didn't fit the story anymore. So you have to be really willing to acquiesce and let others take the lead, knowing that as editors, they see things, and as stylists, they see things, and as photographers, they see things that we as designers simply just don't see. It's like we're on different aisles in the same theater.
And you're so emotionally connected to the work and what's happening there too.
Very much so. I was like, what do you mean that room's not going to make it into the book?
You're
That's like the crown gem of my crown. But what it was, one lesson I did learn, Jacqueline, is that I'm going forward always use the same photographer for every project for consistency. The reason why some of our earlier projects from 10, 12 years ago did not make the cut was because I had a different photographer or photographers, and they had different angles and different lighting and different shadows. And it wasn't congruent with what the main photographer team had done for the other 90% of the book. So those images and those homes, for as great as they were, did not make the book because it just didn't visually coalesce, or we couldn't get back into the homes because either the clients had, I don't know, divorced, moved, sold the house, whatever, and the homes were no longer available to go back and reshoot. So what I've learned from this process is definitely having the same photographer or the same overall vision to shoot every project for a more cohesive vision for a possible future book. We'll see.
No, I think that's an important thing, because you're like, no, it looks great. And then you really put those photos next to each other and they look like they come from different planets.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
And how much the photographer can really change the look of your work. Like, even you're like, those two things had like a similar vibe, but they can look like they came from different decades even. It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's a commitment, isn't it, to shooting every project you do. You get to the end of the project and you just want to walk away by that point usually, but you've got to go back and shoot it, because while it's hot, you know what I mean? You can't leave it. You can't leave it a year or 6 months, something else will have happened and you'll never get back that. So you
and get lots of close-up shots, right? And get lots of close-up shots, lots of little vignette shots. It's not just about having the overall room angles, but it's also about getting the really tight vignette shots as well, because those also can fill up an entire page of a book or a quarter of a page that can make that spread sing in the book. So you have to have all of those elements, not just your overall room shot.
So it sounds like, the next thing I wanted to ask about was budget and time, and touching on these things. The timeline starts way before, you even want to do a book sometimes. And the budget is built into different things. So Kate, how did you handle that? Were you pulling from old photography, new? How did you sort of figure out, because books can get expensive, like it can add up for the designer.
And we're really cheap in Europe. When I hear about all the sort of teams that people have, I'm like, my God, it's just us. I mean, heavens, I don't even know how we couldn't have.
Christopher about his chicken stylists.
I know.
I did my own chicken styling. I cleaned my own.
I'm the stylist. So I'm the stylist. So I was on every shoot. I styled absolutely everything, and we started shooting our projects from the very first project. So I think, And then the very last project that went in was our own home. So we had to finish our home. There was pressure there and money going into that, because we were like, oh my God, I really have to have that Crisana wallpaper, and it has to, and I know it's $10,000, but I need it, and I need it tomorrow, you know, that kind of, so we had to get that in, and that was the deadline, you know, because everything else was done, you know. It's a sort of a 10-year viewpoint, if you like, in terms of the project we chose, maybe even longer, maybe 15, but the last one was ours, of course. It's always your own thing. And then, you know, that's really where we kind of went a little over budget on that, because we had to get it finished. But in terms of finance, I would say it's the time, actually, as far as I'm concerned. You know, it's a year of your life, you know, and that's quite valuable time, I guess. So I really had to take it as a like a full-scale project, rather than another actual interior design project, if you like, because I was on it almost all the time. So I think that's the commitment, more than the you know, to have it in your hand, like Corey's just, you know, being able to hold his book since, I don't know, a couple of days maybe. It is like having a child, in a sense. You know, it's really special to unpack the first box. You know,
you also have to really account for the marketing that you cannot put out there as far as your project. So I was told that the reason why Bunny Williams and Charlotte Moss and, you know, so many have such great, you know, successful books, they hold back a lot of the photography from social media, from getting published in magazines, because they want the book to remain fresh. So you also have to market for, you have to account and budget for the marketing costs that you will not be putting out there, as far as promoting your firm, promoting your design brand in magazines, holding back so much of your work for so long. Because if you want the book to stay fresh, that means I can't go to Gallery and pitch this room because this house is going to be in this book, and you all want first right of refusal. Rizzoli also wants first right of refusal. Right. So who cancels out who? Well, okay, you have to hold it for a while. Then it goes in the book, and then you don't want it anymore. So, you know, so you have it's a sacrifice. You have to really budget for that from a marketing and promotional standpoint. How long can you go without putting out new work on Instagram, on your website, if you're holding it back for your book? It's something to consider.
And Christopher, how does that work for you? I mean, yours is a little different. It's not a series of projects. It's your own home and how you live there. But timing wise, I mean, you know, I worked at Martha Stewart for a long time. It's hard to show all the seasons and not miss the tulips that day. Like, how did you put that all together? I mean, you really have to have a farmer's almanac sometimes.
We were lucky. I mean, rain came some days, but predominantly we were okay, and we could shoot outside and we could shoot inside. And the photographers were a little bit flexible in when they could exactly come. Like if we needed to shift from a Friday to a Saturday, they would do that if our weather was really bad. So we had some adjustments in that. You know, that was the sort of blessing in it, is their sort of being able to move a little bit. Yeah. You know, getting everything to, the harder part is getting everything to flower on time, and to know, like, everybody, when I've had my interior shot, and I always say it's so much easier to do an interior shoot because, you know, you've got the bed, it's all made up, the sheets are on it, you've got your pillows, your sofa's calm, everything's in place for the large part. But outside, it's dealing with a whole nother beast, because like the weather, the wind, there are so many other sort of variables that go on. And so you learn little secrets, like who's got the best foxgloves that are in bloom when the photographers are coming, and you buy, you know, 15 of the best foxgloves that can be dropped into the little holes in your garden for that moment. Like there's little tricks like that you figure out along the way that will get you working. You know, then the other part that, if all else fails, they can do some great digital reworking of things. Like there were shots that didn't have my dogs in it that we thought would enhance so much more. So the dogs were taken out of one picture and cropped into another one at the end one. And you can't even tell that these were done. And I don't like to do that hugely, but for the times we did it, it worked out really well. We took all of our own pictures. The only ones, there was 2 pictures that were run previously in Veranda magazine, because it was a snowy winter when Veranda had visited and done a Christmas story. And then we used one other photographer for one shoot, and he did a really good job. But I had the idea that we would reshoot my Easter table. I thought the first one, which is the one in the books, I could have done better. And I did a more elaborate, more sort of elegant, kind of fancy table. And Kathleen at Rizzoli said, you know, Chris, we really like the first pictures better. We really like it. And I just backed away and said, you run with that. And so I've got an Easter story that's up my sleeve that'll happen at some other time or be out there. So, you know, you listen to people and listen to how it all goes. So.
Right. Yeah. Before I ask this wonderful panel another question, I just want to make sure that everyone knows you can ask questions in the Q&A, and we'll be taking those in about 10 minutes. So please be sure to ask your questions to our wonderful panel of writers. And then it's coming across so much as we speak, but you all have such strong personalities and strong points of view. I wanted to know, like, what are the different ways that you injected that and wove your personality in different ways into each chapter? Corey, you had spoken of some things before, but I know there's this whole music thing going on. Can you touch on how you did that?
Absolutely, happy to share. So for me, being from Detroit, Motown, our big thing is big, cars, but also great music, right? And so for me, for the book, we want to kind of showcase that music throughout the musical notes throughout the book. So when you open up the book, you can see the end papers, which features music. It has, headsets and LP records and boom boxes, and then it has several iconic Detroit symbols like Diana Ross and the Supremes and the Four Tops and Stevie Wonder and the Campus Marshes and all these different things that mean a lot to people from the Midwest. So we wove that musical reference throughout the entire book, and each chapter has some sort of touchstone to music, because I believe that interior design is essentially music for the eyes. It's visual music. So we kind of wove that theme throughout each chapter. The sketches, each chapter opens with a sketch drawn by myself and then closes with a sketch drawn by me, which is why, again, the wrist is like, needing to be rehabilitated. And then, of course, the title of the book is called Design Remix. So the whole urban, traditional meets, contemporary R&B, hip hop, pop music, that's kind of like the vibe of the book. And it's different. It's off the beaten path. I hope people love it, because it is not going to be your expected coffee table book, but that was the goal. And I'm just so thrilled that Rizzoli and the powers that be there were willing to support such a vision that was so off the beaten path.
And Kate, how'd you bring your personality? What are those special touches that are, unique and true to you?
I'm a collector. I'm a magpie. I collect ceramics and paintings and drawings and sculpture, and not necessarily very expensive things, but just, I'm on the market all the time. No, I don't mean the market like the US terms. I mean the market down the road here in France, looking for stuff. And
we all want to be at the market down the road in France. So don't feel like we're snubbing you in any way, because if given the choice,
it's just like I cannot avoid that. So I wanted to bring that kind of thing in. I work with a couple of artists, maybe 5 in total. So I wanted to bring their work. I work very closely with 5 on different projects. And so their work's very important in the story. And I wanted to also reference the still lives that are so important in the Netherlands, which is where I also live, where I really live actually, is Amsterdam. This is COVID living. Amsterdam's my real home. And this history of still lives. So we really wanted to shoot still lives that represented what was going on in my head. And that was kind of funny, because my husband was shooting it and we hired another stylist, because I couldn't do my own head. That was weird. So I was like hiding in the kitchen, and they were shooting in the cellar. Like, don't come down here. Just don't come down here till it's done. So I wasn't allowed to move. I was like sitting in the kitchen going, I wonder what they're doing. And then when they showed me, it was what was in my head. I was really like, oh, wow. It's a little bit of this, a bit of color, a little bit of a bronze thingy and some fabric and a thing and a this. And it was exactly what I wanted. So that was the only thing I didn't have my hands on. And I liked it. So that was a
deep psychological journey in how other people think what's going on in your head. I love that.
It was nice. I relinquished that.
Yeah.
We have that.
Christopher, what were your touches, or what were your moments like that?
My message in the book is about living well and doing that on all different levels, from gardening to entertaining. And the other big message is to encourage people to do some of the things that I do, to get out there, to plant some dahlias, to have people over. Like, those are the big moments that make the book completely me. And at the same time, I hope that people can see themselves in those pictures and say, well, I don't have antique Chinese wallpaper like Chris Spitzmiller has in his dining room, but I'm still going to do an Easter table. Like, my thing isn't being like, I don't want people to be just like me. I want people to like do their own version of it. And that's my big message along there, is like educating people to like, these are the plant names of the plants that I grow. These are the birds that I keep. These are the animals, which are very uniquely me. And like, maybe you might want to try and do some of these things yourself. Like, or if you live in an urban environment, maybe the book is just a visual journey that you have on a Sunday afternoon, sitting in an armchair, and think like, oh, well, that's what somebody's doing in the country. You know, it's just it's a journey that I'm trying to encourage people to go on.
That's great. It is so beautiful, and it's very inspiring. And maybe I'll come up with something for Easter that's very special. So you have this great book out. You've put so much effort into getting it done, getting it off to the printer, having Kathleen give you a gold star on every page. And then once it's out in the world, you know, you have another task. Like, only half the work is done. Now you really have to get out there and promote it. People aren't just going to find the book. So what has your journey of the book promotion been like? I'm going to ask you first, Kate, because your book came out last fall, winter.
Yeah.
So you've been on the road a little longer. And what's it been like?
It was a COVID story, you know, because it was supposed to come out in March, and of course it couldn't get printed because it was being printed in Italy and we couldn't print it. So it didn't get printed until September. And I received the first box, just like Corey's just done, I guess, in Amsterdam in September. And we had 2 days before they were going to lock us down. So we threw a party. We only could have 40 people because of, you know, the regulations at that point, and it had to be outside. So I looked at the weather. I thought, okay, we've got 24 hours to pull this together. Let's just do it. And we did it, which was great. At least I got one signing and one party. And then since then, it's been pretty much impossible here to do anything socially. So we couldn't do any bookstore signings at all. Or could I travel? I couldn't go anywhere. So it's been online all the time. So, I mean, obviously, you know, we've done a couple of conversations. I've done a lot of online interviews with people, Instagram films with people, a lot of Instagram stuff. You know, it's sort of slowing down slightly now because there was a big push November, December, January.
Yeah.
For Christmas, it was really a push for Christmas. But I think what I would love to do is if, you know, if we ever get out of here, let's say, to do the trips I plan to do. Because the thing with the book is that it doesn't just disappear. It's there, you know, you've got it in front of you. You can still go and give a lovely dinner and, you know, entertain people with the idea that, you know, inspired you in the first place. So I'd love to do the States, Australia, you know, Hong Kong maybe, but, you know, who knows?
Yeah, we all want to go so many places. You know, I think writers used to complain about the book tour, and now be like, please.
Oh my God, there was a book tour.
Yeah.
Christopher, your book came out last Tuesday?
It's 3 weeks now that it came out. So it was the 9th that it came out. So I think that we're going on 3 weeks with it. So when I came, I think I told you before that I looked at it kind of like an alien on my kitchen table, and I was like, oh, it's there. You know, it sort of scared me, and I didn't want to go close to it. And then I showed Ashley, and I showed Mary McAvoy, and I showed Martha, and I heard their views on it because I had gotten so close to it. And it sort of then came to life, and I started to like love it, carry it, embrace it. And it wasn't like this alien that had popped out, like, you know. So you know, I sent probably about 350 copies out to friends and close clients, and put a hand addressed note with it, telling them to Instagram it and do whatever love that they could do with it. And I think that really helped promote it. the magazines have all been great. Gallery did a great story on it. We've got the back page of Town and Country right now, and there's some other things that are still in the pipeline that are going to come up, because the thing that I've learned about this is you want to sort of like string it on a little while. You don't want to have it all be during the time that it comes out. Like you want to have like some people who will Instagram it a month out and more later like that. Martha did a great little video about it. And she posted it on her thing. I've got my friend Mimi Thoresen in Italy going to do one, and a couple of other friends who are going to do some videos that I'm going to post about it. So it's sort of a long sort of term thing. And there are some in-person things. I'm going to go down to Palm Beach and speak to the Four Arts. They have a theater down there that usually seats 700 people, that it's going to seat 100 people for COVID. And then a store in Naples, Florida is going to do one. And then I'm going to Texas. And you know, I'm not one of the COVID crazy people. I wear a mask and I wash my hands and I do all this stuff, but I'm going to get my first vaccine next Tuesday. So I'll have that under my belt going forward. So, you know, I see sort of a light going on. There's also a couple of garden shows that are going forward. One at Old Westbury Gardens that I'm going to be signing, and one in Ladue. And then we're going to host our own garden event at the farm in May through the Garden Conservancy. And so people can come see the tulips in bloom. And so we're doing as many things as like that we can do to promote it. And, you know, a lot of it now comes from Instagram. I have to say, it's amazing what a tool that has been for it. So I'm happy to see that sort of spread the word.
And Corey, it's one day out. What's it looking like? What's going on for you?
Well, it's right. So the book came out yesterday. So I am still taking it all in, obviously. It's been a tremendous experience. It's been so well received already. And we're going to have to navigate this changed landscape with regards to the pandemic. We are coming out of the pandemic, which is very positive. We're moving into warmer weather. And we're going to be safe. We're going to be careful. We will do some book signings probably later on this summer when it's a bit, I think when more people have gotten the vaccinations. And again, the hot weather's on our side. That's where rooftops, that's where, you know, large open spaces and fresh air and vaccinations can all work in our favor. We're going to be doing book plates. So I'm going to be, we're designing these really nifty, cool book plates that we're going to let our followers know they can order through the website, that I will autograph and personalize to each reader, and they can purchase that through the website. And basically, I'm just going to charge them for the cost of postage, really, just to get it to them. Don't send me the whole book. Just let me send you something. Right. You can stick it inside the book. And we're going to certainly do autographed copies as well. So we're going to do a little bit of both. What's been overwhelming so far is the folks that have bought the book online and are like, please sign my book, but we're in the middle of a pandemic. How do I even get to you? So we're going to do some creative virtual programming with the book plates. I think that's going to be the real way we can get this out there to people, and they'll just have to pivot. And I think people will be accommodating to that. I had brunch with Kathleen yesterday to celebrate our book, and she was mentioning that for Christopher and for Kate and I, we're going to be given a measure of grace by readers during this time frame, because they all know that we launched our books in the middle of a once in a century moment. And so they have to be, and they will be, patient and accommodating. Like, it's not going to be this fleeting thing that's only hot for a moment, then it's just off the radar. We're going to be given a little bit of latitude, I think, over the coming year. We need to get it's like a leap year in a way. Like, I want the whole year back that we just lost. I want my whole birthday back. My birthday is tomorrow. So
happy birthday.
So, thank you. I am still
mine
43.
is on Friday. So we're the same.
Aries. We're all Aries. I love that.
I'm the 26th, you're the 25th. Hey.
The 25th. Right. Yeah. So that said, I am still 43 because last year doesn't count. Right. I had a COVID birthday. So that's just completely like time zone, different dimension. That was a different Corey. So I'm still 43 tomorrow. And the same thing holds true for our books. I think that people are going to say, you know what? Let's give them another 9 or 10 months to really promote these books the right way. Because it's not our fault that this virus came in and kind of confiscated our freedoms for a long time.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I'd love to ask each of you this one last question, but what surprised you most about this process? What was the one thing that you're like, oh, I had no idea?
The love, I think, that comes back I was really charmed by that. I mean, the notes and the letters and the Instagram comments and the people just, we sent out a lot of books too. And we also did a hand signed letter with all of them. And it was just quite moving how many people loved it. And people that said, oh, I didn't know anything about you and your background and everything. And it's just so interesting. Whereas, I mean, I don't think I have a particularly interesting life, but other people do. That was really charming. I think there was a lot of love, and I felt that, especially as Corey said, this year was a year that was so challenging for so many people, and yet buying books is kind of a pleasure, isn't it? I mean, buying hardback books of any description is such a joy, especially now. You don't need clothes really, and I obviously need a lot more pottery in my life. I just need loads. But, you know, a book is just it's just such a wonderful thing to have. And I think it was a good time to bring out a book. I really do. Wonderful. Yeah.
And what about for you, Corey? What was your biggest surprise?
My biggest surprise when laying out the book was discovering how much I favor certain lamps, different items, accessories. When you are designing clients' homes and you pull together things that you love, you think those clients are never going to meet each other because they won't. And so you go to things that work, you know, like this is the right chandelier or the right, you know, accessory or the right, you know, box or objet or whatever. And you get the same concepts because these clients are not going to meet each other. And you know, it's going to be a great outcome. When you lay the book out and you see just how much you really love that lamp, it's like, oh my God, Corey, you love this lamp. You've used it like 15 times. And so you have to get creative and say, okay, can we put this room in chapter 1 and then put this house in chapter 8? So they're not like close, because you realize, wow, I can be a little lazy sometimes when it comes to this creative process. So now, you know, for the next album, if you will, the next singles, we're going to be much more diverse in our selection process. If you get this emerald green lamp, you will be getting it, and only you will be getting it, because no one else is ever going to get it ever again.
So it was a real mirror for you.
Yeah, I mean, no one. I don't think any of us sets out thinking I'm designing this career and this firm and these clients' homes from the angle of doing a book. You design for what the client's needs are, and so Michigan's a very different marketplace. It's not like New York, where you have an antique store in every corner and all these different design centers. Michigan is a very small town, and so therefore the resources to pull from are a bit more limited. So now I'm living here, I'm loving all the different things I can fly in and bring in and have made. But I didn't have those resources 10 years ago when I started the firm. So the book shows the progression, and I'm grateful for that, but it will never happen again.
Well, maybe you can talk to Christopher about some lamps. He can maybe help you out there.
I told him the other night, I said, I wanted to get dinner or something, and I want to totally like raid your lamps. And that's just a shop that carries your lamps around the corner from me on 72nd. And I think between Lexington and 3rd in my neighborhood. And they carry so many gorgeous Spitzmiller lamps. So I'll be.
Are we talking about KRB or Mecox? Which one are you talking about?
KRB.
Oh,
We
yeah.
love
KRB.
So we're in the same neighborhood. I'm literally down the street. I'm 2 blocks away or a block away from KRB. So we definitely have to get together. So yeah.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Perfect.
Absolutely.
And Christopher, what surprised you?
I think the same thing that Kate said before is the love. And I think part of it also is sort of the self-love. Like, I don't see all that I've achieved until something like this book comes forward or a piece of press comes out. And then I can like really quantitatively look at it and be like, you've created something, you know, because I'm so busy trying to get whatever it is, the lamps out for Corey or, you know, or whatever you all need at Gallery or whatever. Like, I'm busy in my day to day trying to get all this stuff done. And yes, I smell the roses and I take time to enjoy my geese and everything else. But, you know, we did a thing where you could buy a signed copy from our website, and we sold like 800 or 1,000 copies on it. And like looking through that pile of people who like called in and spent the $45 and seeing names that like I'd gone to high school with, or I'd gone, you know, like that part of it of like who was in that pile. I mean, it was like so heartwarming. And then, we get other things, like I sent all the first ladies that I had made lamps to, and Laura Bush sat down and penned off a handwritten note on the day the book was published. It's just a little card, and it's very humble, but like, I'm going to have that note from Laura Bush framed. And it's like, like that, like made it all like, oh my God, you've really made it. So
that's wonderful.
fabulous. Yeah.
That's wonderful.
That's so lovely.
Feeling that community, feeling, you're putting something out there, but you're not just putting it out there, like people, it's really generating emotion from people and attachment, and, they're spending time with your book and it's touching them. That's amazing.
None of us know how well it's going to be received. We put our best foot forward, and then there's a moment, and I think that was my fear. Like, how is it going to be received? Like, it's done now. And like, how are people going to embrace it? Is it going to be too much of a vanity thing, which was not my goal at all? Like, I didn't want to do that book. And so like, that's, I think, sometimes the fear that we all have inside of us. It's like, we know in our gut that we've done our best, but how is that going to always be perceived is the scary part.
Imagine feeling that way every time you put out a magazine issue, like multiple times a year. You have that. You're like, why hasn't anyone called? Did they not get it yet? Do they?
That's something that I've learned with anything. You need to reach out and say, I saw your apartment in whatever, it looked great. Or if somebody publishes some of this stuff, I'm really happy with how it looked. Because I've had friends like you, and they're like, well, we published this article and we haven't heard anything. And like, you have to go under the assumption that no news is good news. I mean, we do that because every pair of lamps we send out, we don't get a thank you note, and we don't often even hear like if it's good or bad. But if there isn't anything, you can assume sort of that on the other part of it. But it's always good to reach out. I mean, people forget that phone calls are welcome, that like, even busy people like to get the phone call. They may not be able to pick it up at the moment when you're calling, but they're like, oh, she made the effort to call. Like, that's a good thing. So yeah.
Don't call me back, but I just wanted to let you know, sort of thing. So we have some great questions from our lovely audience. Someone anonymous has asked, what are some of your own favorite design books? And did you look at any particular books for inspiration?
I really like Mary McDonald's book.
Mm-hmm.
I love Mary personally, and her book to me was fabulous. I enjoyed hers. Another friend, Mark D. Sykes. I haven't got his second book yet. Don't kill me, Mark. I got your first one on my coffee table.
You've been busy. You've been busy. It's okay.
Still a little busy, but I love Mark, and so I loved his book. Who else? There's still Alexa Hampton. I have both of hers. Ron Woodson, Jamie Rummerfield. There's some great tomes out there. There's some great stuff out there, and I looked at many of them just to see, the sizing of the books. My book's a bit more on the smaller side as far as logistically speaking. It's a smaller book. I copied off of Mark D. Sykes. He has a smaller imprint, and I like that because you can take it with you to the beach, put it in your bag, bring it to High Point so I can autograph it. Versus these large books that are lovely, but they can be cumbersome to transport. So,
and they don't always fit on the bookshelves, even if you do have them at art book height.
Exactly.
Yeah. And Kate, how about books from you? What are some? Give us like a great European title that we're all going to have to track down.
Christian Liègre books, I think, would be, they're my two favorite books from Liègre, who sadly passed away last year, a long time ago. I mean, they must be 15, 17, 18 years ago, maybe, but they were so inspiring. The sort of way he saw things. It was just amazing. And then I would say probably we were really influenced by a book I found in Russia about Chanel, which was weirdly, it was about an exhibition that was staged in Moscow, collaborating with Chanel. And it was one of the most beautiful books I've ever seen. I've never seen it again. It's my treasure. And I really, they did something like 12 different kinds of paper in one book. So it was like going through fabric. It was so is so beautiful. I missed it. It's in my other house. I miss it right now. It's just awful.
Those books are so special.
But I just think, to make a really, really beautiful book that's like a piece of treasure, that book was like that. And some graphics. I think some things like, I would see graphics in a book about I don't know, it could be about cars, but I thought, oh, that's a really interesting way of using graphics. So, but I think for design, it would be Liègre. They're the ones I'll never give away.
Yeah, and they're so interesting to see how long it's been since them. And you're like, oh my gosh, this is still influencing other designers today.
Yeah.
And has a certain freshness in a way as well. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And Christopher, what's on your design bookshelf behind
Well,
you?
there's a lot of cookbooks. There's a lot of design books that you see behind me. I'm a big bookophile. I remember reading on New York Social Diary that Dwayne Hampton hid her books behind curtains. And I'm like, I've thought of a lot of places to hide my books because they're like under chairs, they're under the sofa, you know, and I make myself go through and cull through them every so often and like feel like, does this give me love still? And let some of them go because there's just not enough room for everything out there. And but my book is based on basically, you know, Martha's first book, Entertaining, and Bunny's An Affair with the House, which were, you know, as I said before, still in the top 100 selling. And what I tried to encompass in mine was to reach further out from the design world and to grab into gardening and to grab into gardening and to grab into these different fields of interest that are all, you know, perfectly legitimate things and have a broader reach with it. So that's what I was trying to do with mine.
That's great. Speaking of Dwayne Hampton, right now my bedside table reading is Mark Hampton on Decorating, which is just such a classic. It's so beautiful. Those watercolors that he does and the way that he describes rooms is just, it's magical, right? Oh, what do you have there?
These are two watercolors that he did for Albert. And then on the back, he's got a little card that he wrote to it. And then this one, which is, I think, in that, and said, "Happy birthday, Albert," you know, and supposedly he did them in like 15 minutes that he just, yeah, no, Markham, who worked for him, says he whipped those things off like so fast that you wouldn't believe it. Like, and you know, this was before we had cell phones, you know what I mean? So he was like,
doing, like,
he was doing it, he was remembering, like, you know, he'd be able to do that abstract painting behind you and the little pottery you've got, and he would do them all from memory, which I don't think I could do these days. Like, you know, I'm so reliant on my phone. But
you know, I think
Alexa can do it too.
Does anyone have that Jeremiah book, The Illustrator?
Oh, I
yes,
love
I think there's two of his books. I have the first one and the second one. Yes,
that's heaven. You know, that's just heaven. It's just so inspiring, the way that man could paint, you know. So some things just rise above, you know, and they just stay there and they'll always be fabulous. And that's one.
I have two more quick questions we should get to. One is, do you have any advice for an artist / poet who wants to create a coffee table book combining artwork and poetry? That's interesting. I mean,
get a good art director.
Get a good art director. And I think, you know, it's about developing that concept of, you know, how do these things go together? And I mean, artwork and poetry
go together very well, I think. I mean, I know one immediately that I can think of where those two elements are combined. So I think it's a perfect combination.
Yeah,
absolutely. But what I mean by getting a good art director is you've got to not make it repetitive. So you've got to balance the art with the words, and you know, you need a good eye on that, I think.
Yeah,
it's a different creative point of view.
It really is. I'm always inspired too. Brett Gorvey, the gallerist, does an Instagram post almost every day that combines an artwork with a poem that are from two different spaces, but he to see those two things and how they work together is really interesting. But I think it's about coming up really with a concept, just, and what's your angle and how can you stick to that focus? I think that's what the publishers are, you know, really looking for. And Christine Anderson asked, what is the average budget for a beautiful coffee table book? Which I think is quite a range. And then what are the odds you'll be invited by a book publisher to do a book versus having to pay for the costs yourself?
I can't really speak much to self-publishing, but what I can say is if you're looking to do the book on the level that Rizzoli or a publication on that, a publishing house on that level produces, you should be prepared to drop serious coins when it comes to photography. Your biggest cost is going to be your photography, and you are expected to fund the photography, and not just the shooting, but also the styling, the fresh flowers, the vegetables you put on the island in the kitchen. you're responsible for all of that. You become essentially the de facto art director for your book. That can run you, if I just keep it crazy real, you can spend 60, 70, 100,000 or more in photography and styling. You add it all up over a period of years, you can spend a lot of money on that. It does pay off because then you own the rights and you can give it to different magazines and move it around the way you want. But people don't like grainy, cheap looking imagery in the books, and the publishers and the magazines won't run it anyways. So that's going to be the cost. I think you also have to, I don't know about for you two, I had to hire the co-writer, and that was an expense as well. They covered the cost of the graphic designer, but often you have to cover the cost of your co-writer. So those are all things that you have to budget for when you're doing a book on that level.
It's the truth. He speaks the truth. It can be an expensive process, but also very rewarding, and rewarding in your business where you see it. It's really can be a huge marketing tool as well for new business and finding new clients. Well, thank you all for being a part of this. I want everyone to purchase the 3 fantastic books by our panel: Elan, The Interior Design of Kate Hume, and Design Remix, A New Spin on Traditional Rooms by Corey Damen Jenkins, and A Year at Clovebrook Farm by Christopher Spitzmiller. All fresh new books that you can enjoy, because if you're like me, you've watched everything on Netflix, and reading a book feels really good when you've been staring at screens all day. So I highly recommend all of those. And then when you're done, perhaps you can pick up the spring issue of Gallery, which is out right now as well. So thank you to this wonderful panel. This has been so much fun. I just love talking to you and appreciate your passion and dedication to design and creating such fantastic books.
Thank you so much.